Leadville, Colorado, winter of 1892. That year, the city still lived off coal, horses, and the promise of snow that almost always remained just a threat. The men, accustomed to resisting the cold with worn coats and stubborn fires, scoffed at any exaggeration. Winter always passes, they would say, as if repeating an old excuse more out of tradition than certainty. But there was one man who thought differently. Elias Crow. He dug, alone, every day. While others repaired fences, carried firewood, or prayed for better days, he disappeared underground. He dug tunnels wide enough to live in. He carried provisions there. He stockpiled dry wood. He slept beneath the surface. They laughed at him at the fairs. "The mole!" the children shouted, and the adults added with the easy cruelty of those who never needed to foresee the worst. "He's digging his own grave." But that December, what befell Leadville was no ordinary winter. It was something no one there had ever seen before. And when the cold engulfed the entire city, the entrance to Elias's shelter was already covered in snow. Leadville was a place that relied more on repetition than on change. The city awoke early to the sound of the church bell and the hooves of horses clattering on the hard streets. The men greeted each other with short nods and long glances. The women came from the market with their hands firmly gripping their baskets, and their voices low. No one liked surprises there, and Elias was a constant surprise. He was in his early 40s, but had the quiet face of someone who had lived 3 times as long. He lived in a small cabin, away from the main road, but what really caught the eye was the hole, an opening in the ground, reinforced with wood, like the entrance to a well, only deep enough to swallow a man whole. It was there that the rejection began. One morning at the end of Mass, Father Whitmore remarked aloud, "A good Christian builds upward. He doesn't dig downward." The comment became a seed, and the city was fertile ground for judgment. Elias didn't respond. He never responded. He listened. He knew. But he kept going. He walked through the streets with his boots dirty with earth, a shovel on his shoulder, his gaze fixed on the ground. He bought flour, dried beans, candles, and salt, common items, but in unusual quantities. He didn't talk. He paid, nodded, and left. At the fair, the jokes took shape. If the world ends, the mole already has a house, right? Is he hoping for gold? Or to rot in there? The butcher, a large man named Hank Delaney, was straightforward one day. "Did you lose someone down there, Crow? Or do you want to be buried alive?" Elias just looked. He didn't answer. He returned to his shelter, as always. And down there, far from prying eyes and scorn, he continued his work. He shored up the walls with oak planks. He created compartments, one corner for sleeping, another for storage, yet another with a small improvised furnace and smoke vent camouflaged by stones at the top of the hill. But what he knew, no one else knew, and what he feared, no one else feared. An old miner before he died had said something years ago. "The ice is coming back, Elias. Just like in 1831, but nobody remembers, because those who remember are dead." The phrase echoed in his head every time the wind cut differently. Every winter Elias reinforced another wall, stockpiled more food, descended deeper. On the surface, the city followed its cycle. Festivals in the heat, Mass on Sundays, the occasional drought, the occasional gale, nothing that wouldn't pass. Faith was strong, the routine, even more so. But that year, winter came early. At the beginning of November, the winds changed direction. The first snows arrived weeks earlier than usual. "It will pass," they said. But Elias reinforced the roof of the entrance. He added more firewood to the stockpile, and he dug another meter, in silence. He didn't know it yet, but the first mistake the other residents would make would be to trust the past too much, and that mistake would cost them dearly, sooner than they imagined. The decision was made in silence. No announcement, no farewell. On an ordinary late autumn day, Elias simply didn't go up anymore. He stopped lighting the lamp outside. The dirt path to the cabin disappeared under the snow that fell earlier than expected. The town didn't notice immediately, but at the market the flour seller missed his large purchase. The blacksmith commented, "Strange." The mole disappeared, and with the disappearance came the laughter. Maybe he got trapped in there. He must have died buried under the rubble. Let him bury himself since he likes the ground so much. No one went to see. No one cared enough. Elijah, however, was more alive than ever. Underground, he had built something rudimentary but functional. 3 compartments connected by reinforced tunnels. One was the sleeping area, with thick blankets, layers of fur, and the wooden structure protecting the roof. The second and most important was the storeroom. Neatly arranged piles of dried grain, salted meat, candles, olive oil, dried wood, and water in sealed barrels. The third was the heart of the shelter, the furnace, built with rustic bricks connected to a discreet chimney that emerged from rocks high on the hill. The smoke was small, but constant. It rose and dissipated quickly. An inattentive eye would never notice. During the day, Elias maintained absolute silence. He walked on rags so as not to make a sound. He read old books by candlelight, and he kept temperature records, a habit he inherited from a brother who died in childhood. He wrote everything down. November 16th, outside temperature, 40. Inside, 90, stable. November 18th, north winds, continuous frost. Meanwhile, up above, the signs intensified. The church well froze. The leaves fell faster. The horses trembled in the stables. Even so, the city ignored it. It's just a harsh winter, we've seen worse. It was then that old Silas, the man who sold candles and stories, stopped in the middle of the square and said, "This isn't winter. This is a warning." They laughed at him too, and they forgot about him. In the 3rd week of November, the first snowfall covered the rooftops. Unusual. Early. It lasted 4 days. It buried the main road. 3 houses collapsed. A boy was found frozen inside a barn. The city began to realize, and too late. But they still mocked Elijah. "I bet the mole is laughing down there. That is, if he's still alive." And he was there. And he listened. From a distance. Each time the wind blew strongly, Elijah would approach the entrance and listen. Hurried footsteps, muffled cries, desperate prayers. I felt the human instinct to open the hatch. But I didn't. "It's still early," he noted. They didn't understand what comes after the second wave. On the morning of the 5th day, the sky cleared. But the city was different. Leadville, once stone and dust, was now white, silent, and brittle. Windows sealed with rags. Horses dying one by one. The coal running out. And faith, slowly too. Elias made a new note. November 24th. The second wave will arrive without warning, and those who trust in the truce will be the first to perish. He didn't know it yet, but he had overlooked one detail, and that small silent detail would become his first big mistake. The first week of constant cold didn't break Elias, but the 8th night almost did. The wooden structure supporting the main entrance had been partly improvised. One beam used there was shorter than the others. Small, dry, and, unbeknownst to him, partially cracked. Over the days, the weight of the snow accumulated on the wooden and earthen lid. He had heard subtle crackling sounds but ignored them. In the early morning of the 8th day, the sound changed. It was dry, final. The entrance ceiling collapsed. The impact silenced everything for a few seconds. Dust, loose dirt, and splinters of wood fell into the first compartment, completely blocking the exit tunnel. Elias woke up to the smell of dust and the immediate absence of fresh air. There, instinct took the place of doubt. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He acted. He knew that spot wasn't vital. There was a secondary tunnel leading to the chimney, narrow and designed for ventilation. She had never tried using it as an escape route, but now, there was no choice. She tied a damp cloth around her face. She grabbed a short candle, and she crawled. The space was too cramped even for him, who was already thin. The plank scratched his back, his knee scraped against a stone, but he continued, inch by inch. It took him 42 minutes to reach the opening. When he pushed the stone lid, the light blinded him. He was alive. The entrance, however, was lost, buried under more than a meter of compacted snow. Going back was impossible, which meant he had to rebuild, or freeze. With stiff fingers and short breath, he began to carve a new emergency passage. He used the blade of an old axe to dig at an angle, connecting the chimney area to the interior of the shelter. He worked for 7 hours, non-stop, without eating, without speaking. In the end, he fell to his knees on the cold floor. The new route was ready, and the error, corrected. Collapsed input. Divert energy to lateral reinforcement. Human error. Corrected without loss. That was all he wrote. In the city, the situation was worsening at the same time. Those who had laughed were now trembling. The firewood was running out. The fireplaces no longer warmed. The market closed. The church was packed, not out of faith, but for warmth. Hank Delaney, the butcher, lost 2 fingers while trying to cut frozen meat with a bare metal blade. But even amidst the chaos, no one mentioned the mole. Pride still outweighed fear. Elias watched everything from afar. He would go out at night when the wind would die down for a few hours. From the top of the hill he would see the darkened houses and the silence of the city. He carried a small telescope. He could see the rags in the windows, the people huddled around weak fires. He noted, Day 12, signs of collapse, scarce fire, minimal movement. If their supplies run out before the second wave, they won't survive. And then, on the 14th day, a new sound echoed. Crying. Someone was calling for help. It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper swallowed by the wind. But Elijah didn't move. Not yet. I knew the worst was yet to come. By the 3rd week of lockdown, the city was no longer sleeping. Groans came from inside the houses. People wept softly. Some burned furniture, books, even clothes to keep the fire going. The water froze in the buckets. Bodies emaciated in a matter of days. It was during one of those early mornings that Elias heard something different. 3 sharp knocks. Silence. Then again. 3 knocks. They didn't come from the city. They came from above. From the ground. Above the side hatch. He froze instinctively. He waited. He listened. Once again. Knock, knock, knock. He blew out the candle. He pressed his ear to the reinforced ceiling. A faint voice, almost swallowed by the snow. Help. Please. Someone. Silence. Then another voice. Small. A child's voice. Mom, I'm cold. It was a woman. And a girl. And they were outside. Elias closed his eyes. He thought about the rules he had written months before. Do not open. Do not leave. Do not help. To survive is to resist instinct. But that voice pierced through stone, snow, and conviction. It was human. It was life in agony. He picked up the short shovel. He climbed up through the secondary hatch. Outside, the sky was white. The wind was strong, but there was a lull, a gap of silence between gusts. He dug quickly, without a word. The earth and ice gave way. The candlelight from inside illuminated 2 huddled faces. A woman in her 30s and a little girl wrapped in a soaked blanket. They were neighbors, Clara Bennett and little Maggie. Elias hadn't seen them since October. The woman didn't beg. She didn't explain. He simply said, "She can't take another night." Elias didn't answer. He reached out his hand. He helped her down. First the girl, then the mother. They were both trembling so much they could barely speak. In the central chamber of the shelter, he sorted out blankets, lit a new candle, and heated water. The girl was crying softly. The woman, silent, rubbed her daughter's hands as if she could push life back into her. For 3 hours, no one said anything. Elias wrote briefly, 2 people sheltered, critical body temperature, stabilizing. But that decision came at a high price. The moment he opened the side hatch, the wind rushed in, and with it, dampness. The next morning, the ceiling of the second chamber was dripping. Condensation, damp wood. More dangerous than the cold was the humidity, which he couldn't control. The flour sacks began to swell. A barrel of rice showed mold. Blankets were found frozen this morning. Technical error. Ceiling failure. Correct within 18 hours. He knew. If he didn't act, he would lose the entire stock in 3 days. But now, he was no longer alone. I had to share space, warmth, food, and silence. Still, he worked. While Clara slept with Maggie in her arms, he emptied the damp compartment. He dried each bag individually. He created wooden channels to divert the condensation, and he reinforced the roof with the last oak planks saved for the future. You sacrifice tomorrow to save today. Primary survival guaranteed. Stockpiles depleted. Chance of external rescue, 0. On the 4th day, Maggie woke up smiling. The first laugh in that shelter sounded like something forbidden. Clara, with deep-set eyes, whispered. She hadn't smiled since her father's funeral. Elias looked, and for the first time in years, he smiled back, but he said nothing. Outside, the city was dying in silence. Father Whitmore was found unconscious, embraced by the altar. The church, once full, was now an empty haven of faith. Hank Delaney abandoned the house to gather firewood. He disappeared into the snow. No one mocked him anymore. Now there was only the hollow sound of the doors banging in the wind, and Elias knew. The worst was yet to come. The cold lost its name. As December turned, nobody said winter. They called it the white silence. Nothing moved outside. No animals, no smoke, no voices. Those who were still alive remained locked behind sealed doors, buried under snow, frozen inside what was once home. The city looked like a cemetery with open eyes, covered lampposts, dead trees, the bell tower frozen in time. Temperature, 26 degrees. Leadville had never seen anything like it. In the underground shelter, life went on, in a limited way. Food supplies were running low. Moldy rice was discarded. Salted meat was barely surviving. Water was being rationed. And Maggie fell ill. A dry cough, a slight fever, and dull eyes. Clara held her daughter and every day looked at Elias with the same expression. Her gratitude was restrained. She never said, "Thank you." She never asked for anything more. And he never spoke about what he had lost. An old photograph hidden in a book was beginning to fade with the humidity. 2 boys, twins. One was Elias, the other, buried decades ago. Day 27. Girl with a fever. Possible infection. Moderate risk. Medicinal herbs exhausted. It was the first entry he wrote with doubt. And doubt was something he avoided like death. In the city, hunger turned to madness. Houses were looted. Backyards burned. A man tried to boil boot leather. 3 young men disappeared in the mountains while trying to find wood. They returned 2 days later. One of them, alone. Nobody asked. Nobody wanted to know. Pride had melted before the snow. On Christmas Eve, the shelter shook. Not due to collapse, but due to something unpredictable. External heat. A group lit a campfire too close to the camouflaged chimney. The surrounding snow melted, releasing pressure and wetting the furnace roof. Elias realized it before it turned into a tragedy. It went up, erased its tracks, reinforced the structure, changed the point of exhaustion. Now the smoke was rising 6 meters to the north, from under a larger rock. Precision, not heroism. 2 days later, something broke the cycle. A bump on the surface, but not in his shelter. Further away, 3 taps. Pause. 3 again. Elias went up with the telescope. He saw Hank Delaney kneeling, knocking on the door of a house covered in snow. Hank was trembling. Thin, face swollen, beard frozen. In her lap she held a bundle that was too small to be an adult. He knocked without shouting. He just waited. Elias watched. Then he went down. He still couldn't. That night, Clara woke up sobbing. It wasn't crying. It was suppressed despair. She's not answering. Maggie was burning with fever. Elias touched the child's forehead and looked at the mother. He said nothing. He left. He walked through the snow as if accepting punishment. He went to the miner's old site, where he knew there might be dry grass under the rocks. The snow stung my face like needles. It took 2 hours. He fell twice. On the way back, He carried a bag of leaves that were perhaps useless, but he brought them. She prepared tea, moistened the child's lips, and waited. 2 days later, the fever subsided. Clara did not smile. She only rested her head on Elias's shoulder for a second. That was all. It was enough. In the second week of January, the cold lost its strength, but not the city. The calmer wind revealed collapsed roofs, trails of dried blood, and makeshift sleds made from ripped-off doors. And the most terrifying thing was the sound, or rather, the absence. The children's laughter, the bell, the blacksmith shop, everything had died weeks before. It was in that silence that Elias heard a knock. 3 touches, then 2. A pause. Another one. This time it wasn't by chance. It was someone who knew exactly where to strike. Someone who chose to strike. In the end, Elias opened the side hatch. He saw a huddled figure. Hank Delaney, the man who shouted, "Failure," in the square. Now, on his knees, thin, broken, in his arms, a baby wrapped in a cloth. Without raising his face, Hank said, "I'm not asking for myself. He's my grandson. He's still breathing, but not for much longer." Elias did not answer. It just opened up space. Hank came in. Clara looked astonished, pressed Maggie against her chest, but didn't speak. Elias warmed a cloth and approached the baby. Hank watched as if witnessing a miracle without knowing how to pray. When Elias offered Hank a piece of dry bread, he hesitated, and then ate it, like someone chewing on their own pride. Hours later, the baby was still breathing. Hank slept for the first time in days. That morning, something invisible changed. The shelter was no longer just Elias's. It was a time for survivors, and nobody disputed that. Elias wrote less now. His notes became signs. A charcoal arrow indicating where to store water. An X on the floor where the ceiling was lower. A red dot in a bag of wet blankets. He led, without commanding. And they all continued on, without a word. The following day, 2 more raids. Old Silas, with his daughter nearly frozen. Then came the Harper twins. Then a woman with a broken arm. The shelter, once built for 1, now housed 7. And Elijah gave way. She shared the rice. She took turns with the heat. She slept less. No one mocked her anymore. But no one asked for forgiveness, because that was not redemption. It was a consequence. And everyone there knew it. One morning, Clara approached and handed over a piece of paper. Shaky handwriting. "Thank you for saying nothing. We only learn when silence weighs more than fear." Elias read. He kept it. He didn't answer. At the end of January, the snow began to melt. The city gates opened. Those who remained emerged like blind men finding the light again. Families gathered, not knowing what to say. The story of the underground man spread, but no one told it with pride. It was passed from mouth to mouth, like a confession. Hank returned to the square with his grandson in his arms. He wasn't shouting anymore. He wasn't speaking loudly. I just looked at the people, and then at the ground. At the fair, a woman murmured, "He survived, because of the man he humiliated." The silence that followed was heavier than the sentence. Elias did not return to the surface. He remained in the shelter. But now, the knocks he heard in the distance were no longer cries for help. They were expressions of gratitude. And he never answered. Spring arrived without applause. Leadville flourished, but with sadness rooted in the ground. Of the 312 residents, only 91 survived. The rest was taken away by the cold, and out of pride. The authorities who arrived weeks later did not recognize the city. Open doors, deserted streets, a fallen tower, a cracked bell, and at the top of the hill, a simple entrance, reinforced with new planks, guarded by a gray rock. No name. The shelter door. When asked who had saved that part of the city, the survivors simply pointed in that direction. But no one spoke about Elijah easily. He was still living down there. I preferred the basement. Hank tried to convince him to come back. The city is different now. You can walk around it without hearing failure. Elias replied simply, "But I still prefer silence." Some things have changed forever. Every house started having a basement. Each father taught his son to dig, store, and build in silence. The schools told the story of the underground man, without exaggeration, as a reminder that preparation doesn't need an audience. In the square, they erected a stone with a simple inscription. Here, we learn that today's ridicule can be tomorrow's refuge. Clara and Maggie returned to the city. The girl grew up telling stories that no one dared laugh at. And every year, on the first day of winter, she would leave a bundle of firewood and a stale loaf of bread in front of the entrance to the hill. Nobody touched it. The next day, the package would always disappear. Elias never truly left that place. But sometimes, they would see a lit candle up high, a sign that the watchman of silence was still there. Some people shout to be remembered. Others, dig. Elias did not save the city with speeches. He only did what needed to be done, before everyone knew it was necessary. And when the cold weather passed, there was no pride left. Neither blame, just silence. But in Leadville, since 1892, no one laughs anymore at those who build in the dark.